Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, or good lunchtime, in fact. Look what I've got here.
Oh, I've got one too.
Oh, and it's even better because we don't just have a book. We've got Natasha Farrant here today, and this is Costa award-winning gorgeousness here. Good morning, Natasha. How are you?
Good morning. It's lovely to be with you and to hear my book described as Costa as gorgeousness and Costa award-winning. Actually, that's always nice too.
Well, it's a really well-deserved title, and Tracy, you have been raving about this in particular, haven't you, since you finished it?
I have been raving about this book in particular. I mean, all the characters are so compelling, but it was the dogs I really liked.
Tell us about it, Natasha. Can you start off by giving us a little rundown of what we can expect?
The dogs.
Well, I'm going to address this answer to Tracy specifically because actually it was a dog that set the whole thing off. So I'll just give you a little rundown about the story. It's about these two orphans, Ben and Lottie, who are on the front cover, who Ben lives on the Sparrowhawk in the title, which is this boat. And it's about how the two of them, in the aftermath of World War I, set off in the Sparrowhawk to escape people who were nasty to them in search of a better life. And they take their two dogs with them on this narrow boat through the canal system in the UK to London, along the Thames, and then around the bulge of Kent and across the Channel to France, which is something you should never attempt to do on a narrow boat unless you've got unless you really know what you're doing, because it's very dangerous.
I thought you were going to say unless you're accompanied by two dogs, but
unless you're accompanied by a whole fleet of rescue boats. It has been done. It has been done in real life.
Has it?
But yeah, it has. And that's, in fact, I read an article about it in a newspaper, and that was one of the sparks that set off the idea, was hearing about these two people who crossed the Channel in a narrow boat with their whippet, in fact, with a dog as well. So it has been done, but yeah, you have to have all the port authorities on your side, and you have to have a rescue boat alongside you, and you have to take a pilot with you, and you have to have at least 3 or 4 days good weather ahead of you. So in case the weather were to suddenly change, it won't affect you. When I was doing research, I asked somebody in a marina at Hammersmith, I said, but could two children take a narrow boat across the Channel? And his answer was like, you'd never get insurance. And I was like, yeah, my kids don't even have passports or money, or yeah. I don't think they're that fussed about insurance. But yeah, Tracy, the reason why I was going to say that the answer was for you is that, yeah, I read this article in the paper about this couple who'd taken the boat across the Channel. But there were all sorts of other things that inspired the book. I mean, one was I read Philip Pullman's Book of Dust, and it was like this big epic boat adventure, and I finished reading it, and when I finished reading it, I sort of thought, God, I want to do something like that. I want to write a big epic adventure set on water. So that was kind of one of the inspirations. And then the other was when I started thinking about boats, was I thought about my grandfather, who he fought in World War I, but he also owned boats. He owned several merchant boats, which were all requisitioned in World War II and were all sunk in World War II.
Oh God.
Yeah. I know, it was really so there are all these sort of stories about them, and they were all named after his children or members, people that he knew. And so it was like, oh, the Francine is at the bottom of the Baltic, and the Patrick is at the bottom of another sea. And so I sort of grew up with these sort of yeah, I mean, I suppose there was a sort of big sort of maritime past in my family. And then there was, of course, this idea of, you know, World War One, and my grandfather who'd fought in the war, but had never talked about it when he came back. You know, he came back from the war, and he really, I mean, like so much of that generation, he just wanted to rebuild, I think, you know, and start a new life, which is very much what Voyage of the Sparrowhawk is about. It's about a whole cast of characters starting a new life. And yeah, so they've got all of these elements, but which are, you know, they're sort of bits, they're sort of background, but they're not a story. And then one day I'm at my friend Jane's house, and I'm cuddling her Chihuahua. She had this lovely Chihuahua called Dobby, you know, because Charles had these really big ears, like Dobby in Harry Potter.
Mm.
And Dobby's a rescue dog. Dobby's a rescue Chihuahua. And he was found by my friend's mother-in-law in a cage, and he was starving and filthy and really, I mean, just in a really, really bad way. And they took him in, and they fed him, and they nursed him, and they looked after him, and he became this sort of wonderful, larger-than-life Chihuahua. And so one day I'm cuddling him, and I sort of said, Dobby, what shall I write about? And he licks me on the nose, and I laugh, and I say, okay, I'll write a book about you. And then everybody was just like, oh my God, yes, write a book about Dobby, that's brilliant. And then somehow, and when I talk about this, you know, when I do school visits and I tell children, it's just like somehow it was like, yes, I've got shipwrecks and my grandfather in World War One, and this sort of this whole idea of rebuilding a whole society, and I have a Chihuahua called Dobby. And somehow he just breathed life into the story, you know, because then you get into, well, okay, a rescue Chihuahua, and I've got this setting, so who rescues him, and then where do they hide him? And yeah, little by little, I sort of asking those questions and sort of putting the answers together. I sort of, yeah, along came Lottie, who rescues the Chihuahua because she's lonely and she needs a friend, and she has a great sense of justice and not much respect for rules and laws. So that's okay. So, you know, so along comes Lottie. And then where's she going to hide him? Because once you've rescued a Chihuahua, or stolen a Chihuahua, you can't very well just take it home and say, look, I just stole a dog. So especially if the people that you live with aren't very nice. So then she has to hide him somewhere. So where's she going to hide him? And at the time I was sort of walking around along canals a lot, because it was just part of my way home. I was studying, and my way home from college was walking along the canal, and there were these narrow boats. So I was like, well, yeah, so if you've stolen a Chihuahua, actually a logical place to hide him would be on an empty boat. But then what if the boat isn't empty? And then so who's on the boat? And so little by little, just by starting with the Chihuahua, and just sort of everything started to fit together. So yeah, the dogs are very much an integral part of the story.
It sounds also like an integral part of the creative process for you as well. It's interesting how the idea seems to present itself to you rather than you searching out the idea. You make it sound like you're a vessel for it.
Yeah, a vessel sounds, yes, in a way. I think a vessel sounds a little passive. And yet I think there are two elements to writing. One is you have to be curious. You're like a detective. Yeah. So you're sort of almost the opposite of a vessel. So you're asking those questions like, so, okay, you've got a Chihuahua, it's going to be rescued. Who's going to rescue it? Why is she going to rescue it? What's she going to do next? How is she, you know, who is going to be her partner? Where do they come from? And so it builds and builds and builds because you're asking questions. But at the same time, sometimes you have to ask the questions, but then the answers, as you say, sometimes just present themselves. So there's this active asking of questions, and then this more receptive waiting for the answers to come. Yeah, I sort of think I call it it's like watchful waiting. You have to be patient, but you can't just wait. You've got to be constantly, actively waiting, if that makes sense. So that when that idea presents itself, you're like, oh yes. Now I get that. So the other day I was reading Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, and there was a line in it that just sort of went straight to my heart. Actually, it was a beautiful line, and I thought, oh, and that line was kind of the key to a character in the book that I'm writing at the moment. The line in Sorrow and Bliss. So then I sort of got out my phone and I just sort of wrote a note to myself saying, just quoting that line and saying, this is what is also happening to Rafi, the character in the book I'm writing at the moment. So do you see what I mean about being sort of watchful?
Yeah.
It's, there's just a sort of part of your brain that's sort of always just sort of ticking over, thinking about the book. So I was so it's that funny thing when people say, how long does it take to write, or how often, or how much writing do you do every day? It's like, well, actually the actual writing process, because I'm busy, I'm doing so many other things, the actual writing process sometimes isn't more than a couple of hours, but actually you're always on it. A part of your brain is always on it, so you're sort of with the book all the time.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. We were talking to William Shaw recently about that's a very beautiful French style drinking bowl there.
It's actually because all the mugs are in the dishwasher.
Oh, you should have owned that, Natasha. Oh yes.
Yes, I always drink tea. I always drink tea out of bowls.
We were talking to William Shaw the other day, and he was recounting how he was sitting minding his own business on a seafront and noticed something happening in the background, and that started to become the catalyst for another idea that he'd had. And I just remember at the time thinking, it's so enriching, that sort of experience, but it must be so exhausting to always be processing. Yeah,
I'm really glad you said that, because I was about to say, yeah, it's exhausting.
But it just sounds like there's all these things that are happening that could always be fed into what you're doing.
Well, and it means that you're sort of on the one hand, you're sort of trying to really, well, I anyway, am sort of trying to really plug into the real world and be in a moment and be present. But on another plane, you're always living in a different reality. And I think, yeah, that can be quite, well, both, exactly like you say, enriching on the one hand and completely exhausting on the other. Yeah.
One of the things that I'm really impressed with about the book, although I found it as an adult reader a bit much, is that you didn't shy away from the hardship for the children. You were just straight in there. You said this is life, and it was hard. And I guess I'm used to it having a bit more of a gentle doling out and an artistic presentation of the difficulties in life. But it's just, let's get this out of the way.
Yeah.
Life was tough for these kids, and then you moved on and you got them out of it. I mean, in the first couple of pages, Ben gets his prologue. He starts out as an orphan in a grey orphanage in a grey town where they ate grey food and wore grey clothes and were barefoot even in winter. And then, so he's already an orphan, and then he gets someone to look after him, and he becomes an orphan again, and he goes to stay with someone, and she abandons him again, and that's like in 6 pages. And then Lottie isn't much better. And
then Lottie has a terrible time as well. I know, I hadn't sort of thought about that. And then a friend of mine, also adult, was reading it, and she was just like, oh my God, what are you doing to these poor children? I know, yeah. And then they go and explore battlefields. I know it's
well, I think it's a really good move, because it's part of, it's how you do it, isn't it? It wasn't gruesome. It wasn't trying to make them unhappy. Children know that life can be hard. And I had a customer standing where I'm sitting once saying, oh, I don't think that bereavement is a good subject for children's books. I don't think that children should have, a book should have orphans in them. It's like, all of these books have orphans in them. But it just laid it out, and then they were able to move on, and it gave a context of why they behaved in the way they did, and I thought it was a really good move.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, it sets the stakes high, doesn't it? It's like, and it's from the beginning, and I think that's what you want in children's books, actually. Well, in all books, frankly, but especially true of children's books, is they need a motive. You want to know what's driving them and why why they're doing this, why they're actually willing to get on this narrowboat and cross the channel on this narrowboat. And they've got to have. If everything was lovely at home, they wouldn't do it.
No. And there's one twist after another, isn't there? And it carries on right through to the end. And I'm going to go back to the dogs, because the dogs actually, they make things happen, don't they? They're not just companion animals. They are key players in moving the story forward.
Yeah, right down to the tiny puppy at the end. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's terrific. And I was on the edge of my seat, and I was so glad that my daughter recommended it to me. And we were taken by a quote on your website that kind of follows in with the conversation that Em and I have been having. Do you still have it in front of you, Em? The quote about, sorry, I should have been more prepared.
Is it the Madeleine L'Engle? The
Madeleine L'Engle one, yes. And she's not appreciated enough these days, is she? Do you remember the quote?
I don't. Yes, it's you have to write the book that wants to be written, and if it's too hard to write for adults, you have to write it for children.
Yes, that's we have both had quite a lot of conversations about how children's books are underestimated as being simple, but they just aren't, are they? Children have to deal with the big stuff, and it's
what's the tricky thing in writing for children, I find, and it's an endlessly challenging but interesting thing to do, is I don't want to hold back. I don't want to patronize them by compromising on the emotion or even the ideas. But at the same time, you have to respect the fact that their experience of life, their vocabulary, their points of reference aren't, I mean, just by dint of being that, being much younger, aren't as extensive as adults. So you have to, so I want to say what I have to say, but I am also conscious that, it's almost to do with respect for them as readers, is to put it in terms that they will understand, that they will be able to refer to. So it's an interesting process, because it means that you have to so a first draft will be just a sort of vomit of ideas and words, but then you sort of have to refine and refine and refine so that it becomes as clear as possible. And yeah, I mean, it's really what every writer should do, I think, but it's particularly true of writing for children.
We were talking recently, weren't we, Tracy, about cultural capital and the
I love that term. Yeah.
And that's really what you're talking about, isn't it? I mean, my husband's a teacher, and he was saying, you read the Philip Pullmans, and you brought up Philip Pullman earlier, but he refers to these academic quads, setups in the college, and there's such an assumption that the child will be able to extrapolate something from that and visualize it properly. But how do you find how do you get the balance right between description and explanation and assumption? How does that work?
Well, I think it's like never assume. And I mean, I've just been reading Children of Castle Rock to my nephew, and there are moments when I'm just like, oh, maybe I assumed too much there. Although, to be fair, he's only 8 and he got most of it. He needed to be told what orienteering was. Yeah, it's a constant it's a constant balance. I think just by sort of reading and rereading it. It's interesting with the descriptions. It's I try not to get carried away with descriptions. It's important to have that sense of space, but place, and to be able to visualize where you are, but you don't need much to be able to visualize. So I try to just keep it to a minimum to keep the action going, but at the same time, like as we know, we want a sense of atmosphere and place. And also then if it does, there are certain things, parts of the description that are necessary to keep the story going. So you need to know how, that the sky is changing color. So if, the chances are, if you're sort of talking about clouds and cloud formation and white crests on the wave, it's because there's a storm brewing, and the storm is an integral part of the plot. So I try to make the descriptions serve the story as well, so that everything's moving forward all the time.
It's a point that I'd never considered before, but we had a customer recently who said that she only reads children's books because she can't take all that description that's in adults' books. It had never occurred to me, but yes, that's it, spot on actually. I loved, and I missed it when I read this the first time, I loved the description of Lottie's aunt and uncle, that over the years, sorry, the background noise.
Okay.
It's good to have customers, but the door makes noise. Over the years, even their blandness had faded.
Can't I say that?
Just
God,
it so really resonated.
I don't remember writing that. Oh my God, that's so mean.
Well,
there you go. I'm not sure how much children will understand that, but it's made us laugh.
Well, I think it's, that's another point where it's really tricky, isn't it? Because you're writing for the children, you're using the terms of reference that they're going to understand, but having it so that it is going to be important enough for the adults to stick with it is, I think that's really important as well. So, I stuck with it. I was on the edge of my seat, and gosh, hasn't it had a lot of praise? I mean, just on the cover, New Statesman, magnificent, Hilary, McKay, joyful, the Scotsman, compelling, the weak junior, wonderful, and then there's that sticker, isn't there?
Yeah, that nice
Costa prize winner. Mine says shortlist. So we're absolutely thrilled with it. What are you working on now?
I'm working on a new adventure story. It's set in the UK, but will involve another sort of trek across Europe, actually. And a lot of another sort of slightly perilous journey, not as perilous as Sparrowhawk, because the main fight is it's to save. I'm very interested in what comes up again and again. And in fact, I hadn't realized I'd written clearly in The Children of Castle Rock. There's a moment when the Major says we have to look after what's precious in the world, and this book is about that. So it's about these children who are fighting to save their home from being destroyed, and their home actually is a place where is a beautiful place where animals, birds, but also people are nurtured. And it's a book about capitalism, essentially. What are you writing about? I'm writing about climate change and capitalism, if you want to know. For 9-year-olds.
We can do that. We can keep up with climate change and capitalism in a children's book. We have very sophisticated children in Wyndham.
Yeah. It depends who asks me, but usually if people say, what are you writing about? It's just like, capitalism. But no, it's about protecting what's precious, and it's about activism, and it's about children recognizing what's important more than adults do. But with, I hope, enough sort of peril and twists and turns to keep the reader hooked. I think so.
And when can we find this?
I mean, there's sort of depths. I'm kind of in the depths of self-doubt right now.
Okay.
I think that's part of the process, though, isn't it?
Sorry, that's why I can't give you this sort of really slick pitch, because at the moment I'm just like, oh God, it's just all going to be terrible. And everybody's going to go, oh, she won the Costa Book Award, but then afterwards she never was able to write anything again. I think it's quite good. And look, you see, I can show you the manuscript there.
Oh, wow.
See, I have actually written quite a lot of it. And then that's what it turns into.
Wow. And lovely to get a little peek into that process, actually.
Yeah, well, there you go. There, that's it. And I can even show you what it starts as. Everything collapsing around me. It starts like that. That's my new French handwriting. Yeah, so there we go. We've got 46,000 words, so that should, you know, that's a book. That's a children's book.
So we've got some background noise here. So sorry about that. When people have read your books, what would you recommend that they move on to if they've enjoyed yours?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. That's like, well, read more of my books. They should. Well, listen, the recommendation that I always give is the books of Eva Ibottsen, because I just think she's a marvelous writer, and she is, well, Sparrowhawk. I sort of thought, oh God, people are going to immediately see that I've basically copied Journey to the River Sea. So Journey to the River Sea is my sort of idea of a perfect children's book. Following on to Journey to the River Sea, I would sort of say, yeah, there's books of Katherine Rundell. Did you know The Explorer? I love The Explorer. I haven't read her latest book, but The Explorer was just wonderful.
I think The Good Thieves is even better than The Explorers.
Is it?
Yeah, actually, that did it for me.
Well, I look forward to reading The Good Thieves, but yeah, so the books of Katherine Rundell. I love Hilary McKay's books, all of them. She just sort of make you laugh at the beginning of a sentence and burst into tears at the end. She's a wonderful writer. And then last year I read a book called October by Katya, Balen, which took a really long time to get out of my head, and which I think, in a sense, the book I'm writing at the moment, which is about you know, saving a place and woodland and a beautiful natural place from development, sort of partly stemmed from reading that book October, which is about a girl who lives off-grid in a forest with her father. I loved that book. And then, yeah, those are all women writers. So a couple of men writers. Piers Torday, I just sort of love everything that Piers writes. And Earle, completely different register to Piers, who writes some sort of magical adventures. Phil's, I mean, I've loved Phil's books right from the beginning, right from being Billy. I've not read When the Sky Falls, but it's sort of very high on my pile of books to read, because that's supposed to be absolutely, everybody says that's just absolutely magnificent. So yeah, quite a list.
It's a lovely list. I mean, they've obviously, if readers have got to get through all your books first before they go on to these, but you know, when they are waiting for your moment of doubt to pass, they'll have a few other bits to be cracking on with. So it's always
Thank you, and that's very elegantly put. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to chat to you. Thanks for stopping by to have a coffee with us, Natasha. And
it's been so nice to see you. Thank you very much for having me.
Lovely to see you. And
Thanks so much, Natasha.
Yeah, we'll keep the eyes on the publishers and the bookshelves, and you'll have to let us know when we have more news about the next one.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Okay.